Hi everyone, this is my response to the critical thinking reading in the two videos. I enjoyed the two videos. They were short, sweet, and to the point. They reminded me of stuff I teach because, like the reference guide here, Writing Across the Disciplines, the one I use for my class, has one that is about critical thinking and argument. And writing argument is basically exactly all the things he described today: being precise, being clear, using the right vocabulary, having concrete examples, because most of us simply go, I like something, and never explain why. So a lot of that part I deal with every day. And if I sound exasperated, it's because I'm frustrated with dealing with some of my students, and I apologize. The text was also, there was a lot of it that's good, and a lot of it I understand, and certainly when it comes to applying critical thinking skills to ourselves and trying to figure out why we do certain things, like act a fool in certain places or over imbibe in others or whatever, some of it, yes. But I was uncomfortable by some of this, for reasons that are logical to me, at least. One was when I disliked the example. It was the example on 316 to 317 when he talks about depression. And he's talking about, well, I read the article and all my symptoms fit, so I can get myself worked up into a state that I have a deadly disease and I will die. Well, okay, yeah, some of that can be critically thought out and logically thought out and, approached differently. But that's perilously close, I thought, to saying you can think your way out of depression. And that is something that I remember mentioning earlier in the semester is something I have a serious problem with him here. People with chronic depression and chronic mental illnesses cannot critically think their way out of it. And I don't care how much Paul says this process will work, it won't. I've dealt with chronically depressed students, chronically depressed people. Had a student who committed suicide a few years ago. Brilliant, on the point of graduating. Couldn't think his way out of his depression. So I have real problems with that one. I also have real problems a little bit later on when he says, talks about focusing on the logic of someone's thinking. And there is an extent to which I can go, okay, because I practice this. When I read a student's essay and it's missing stuff, I go, okay, let me think and see if I can figure out what you were trying to say. And then I go and I write my comments to help them become better writers. But that's a limited thing. Again, I found this problematic, partially because of the example he used, I think, about the person who chooses to live their life in the moment because the government's just going to take it all anyway. That's, again, a problem with mental illness might be going on there. And for me to assume that I can help them critically think their way out of it is very, very problematic. You can never actually figure out or know really what someone else is thinking. This is pretty much a rule of writing. You can only guess. And if you guess wrong, you fail. When you're writing a paper, that's not so bad. When you're dealing with people's lives, that can be devastating. So I don't know how well. I think there are more limitations to critical thinking for other people than Paul talks about in this chapter about strategic thinking. I agree we have to think about things at a high quality. I'm in education, so obviously assessment is something I think about and deal with every day. Did this assignment work? Why didn't it work? What can I do to make it work better? Why are my students reacting this way? So there's some element of all the stuff he's talking about that we do, and I think most of us do it in our workplaces and don't realize it. I think on the whole, the principles sound. I just think Paul gets carried away with his theories and his ideas and goes, I find it ethically irresponsible to basically imply people can think their way out of depression. and what he describes is not really depression. I think it's a little bit irresponsible of him to imply that we can critically think someone else's thoughts. That's not going to work. I'm a big believer in critical thinking, obviously a big believer in ethics and writing, and do most of this sort of stuff with my students. But there are limitations. You cannot impose. I can tell them it's wrong. I can show them the consequences of thinking egocentrically or even sociocentric. I can show them better paths. I cannot make them take those paths. And Paul is maybe it's because I come at it as an educator and I don't look at it as a revelation for me, but Paul occasionally seems to cross boundaries I don't think anyone can cross for other people. And so my reaction's really mixed to this stuff. As it applies to me, well, obviously punk pedagogy, as I mentioned, is all about critical thinking and thinking about structures and institutions and rethinking them and questioning them and take them apart. Look, I'm from a postmodernist literary background, so that ideas of deconstruction and post-structuralism and postmodernism, take it apart, put it back together, look at it around, twist it. Those all make sense to me. Those are natural and normal things and ways I think these days. So a lot of what Paul is telling us, I've been lucky enough to hear before. Maybe in bits and pieces, maybe not put together quite so systematically. But I've still, my reaction has been, since we've been reading this book, I know a lot of this. And I actually have written in a couple of spots where he talks about it, like the fact that we will occasionally find our unconscious and suppressed thoughts very egocentric and infantile. Well, that's basic Freudian psychology and Lacanian if you want to get into it more. So, but I also realize I have a background in this stuff that other people don't have. So what I find frustrating, I know others don't, and that's fine. I can certainly see some of this being useful, but I do think it's much more limited in ways than Paul seems to present it. And I think Paul raises ethical red flags I'm sure he doesn't mean to raise, but they still come up. So that was my take on this stuff. I don't know. I'm going to go read some more I'm going to go teach class and then read more punk pedagogy. So maybe by then I won't be quite as... who am I kidding? I'll still be the rebel that I am. Have a good evening and a good week. Bye.